Hey, this one starts with a single notification and ends somewhere you won't expect. Stay with me. And if you like stories that hit hard, tap subscribe. You'll want more like this. Thursday nights used to feel safe. That one hit me hard, delivered by a single glowing pop-up on a phone I thought was mine. The screen said, "The Grand Avelian, Corner Suite, check in that night," and my wife's name sitting there like a joke. My name is Thayer Locke. I was 58 when I finally understood what happened that early October night, but I was 36 then, still convinced that staying calm meant I'd get respect. I was on the couch with my laptop open, half answering emails for Locke Atelier, half waiting for Lennox to walk in with her heels and her rough day sigh. The TV was muted. The house smelled like reheated pasta. The only sound was my keyboard and the kitchen clock acting smug. Lennox had taken my last name the year we married. She also pushed this dumb matching thing right down to our phone cases. Dark leather, same corner scuff, same little snap flap. "It looks coordinated," she'd told me, like we were a brand instead of two people. That night, 2 cases sat on the counter. I grabbed one without thinking, thumbed it awake, and there it was, an order confirmation sitting on top like it wanted to be caught. Romantic escape package, dinner for 2, champagne on arrival, late checkout. I stared at the words until they sharpened into something ugly. Guest names, Lennox Locke and Bram Hutton. Bram, her high-potential junior colleague. 2 weeks earlier, he'd been at my table at a charity dinner, smiling like he'd never done anything wrong in his life. "Yes, sir, I appreciate the opportunity," he'd said, looking me dead in the face while he drank my bourbon. "Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue." I didn't yell. I didn't throw the phone. Something went quiet in my chest, like the power had been cut and nobody was coming to reset it. My hands went steady, which scared me more than shaking would have. Then the price hit me. $2,480. One night, and the payment line underneath it made my jaw lock. Locke Atelier corporate card. Not our personal account. Not her money. My family's company card, the same one we used for client lunches and project travel. She hadn't just cheated. She'd charged it like she was ordering office supplies. That detail mattered. It told me she felt untouchable. It told me my last name wasn't a promise to her. It was a passkey. I took a screenshot, then another, making sure the date and both names were clear. I sent them to my own email, because suddenly, I didn't trust later. My fingers moved to the search bar. Bram Hutton, LinkedIn, wedding photos. A tagged post from his wife. Maris Hutton popped up on my screen. Plain smile, normal clothes, a woman building a life with the wrong man, and I clicked her profile and started typing her name into a new message. I stared at Maris's profile picture one more time, then typed a message that stayed tight and factual. I told her who I was, that my wife Lennox and her husband Bram were listed on a reservation at the Grand Avelian for that night, and that I had the confirmation in my hands. I attached the screenshot with the date and names visible, and I hit send before I could talk myself into waiting for a better time. 4 minutes later, my phone lit up with an unknown number, and I answered like I'd been holding my breath. "This is Maris Hutton," a woman's voice said, clipped and controlled, like she was forcing each word through a narrow opening. She asked, "Are you sure that's my Bram?" And when I said I was sure, she asked again, slower, like the second time might make it less real. I could hear traffic behind her, and the way she stayed steady told me she was already past denial. "I'm not calling you to argue or comfort you," I said. "I'm calling because I'm not going home to sit on my couch like a fool while they play games." I told her to meet me at Juniper and Oak Coffee, the place across from the hotel with the big windows. "Public, bright, and simple," I added. "If this is wrong, you can walk out and we never talk again." She said, "I'll be there," and hung up without another question. Juniper and Oak smelled like espresso, and every table was packed with people who had no idea what I was carrying. I took a seat by the front window facing the Avelian doors, then ordered black coffee I didn't even taste. My leg bounced under the table until I forced it still, because I refused to look nervous over someone else's betrayal. Maris walked in with her hair pulled back, her face pale but focused. She didn't scan for sympathy, she scanned for the truth, then sat down like it was a meeting. "Show me," she said, and I slid my phone over. She scrolled, stopped on Bram's name, and swallowed hard. "We've been trying to have a baby for a year," she said, flat and careful, like reading a report because speaking like a person would break her. I didn't lie to her, and I didn't sell her revenge because neither one helped. "I want the truth in real time," I said. "If you want it too, we can get it tonight, without warning them." Maris stared at the window, then back at me, and her voice finally cracked just a little when she said, "Yes, I want to know." We crossed the street together, 2 strangers moving in the same direction like we had dinner reservations and nothing to lose. Inside the Avelian lobby, I asked for an adjoining room under my name so the desk wouldn't call Lennox's suite and tip her off. It was late enough that a cancellation had opened a standard room right beside the corner suite, and the clerk slid me the key without making a call upstairs. I paid with my personal card, folded the receipt, and pocketed it. Maris stayed close, silent and rigid, and I pressed the elevator button and stepped in with her beside me. I rode up in silence with Maris, the elevator mirrors throwing our faces back at us like evidence. The carpeted hallway smelled like cleaner and money, and my key card felt too light for what it was about to unlock. Our room sat beside theirs with a small brass number plate and a seam of light under the door. I swiped in, let Maris step ahead, and shut us inside without saying anything gentle. The connecting door was right there between the rooms, painted the same bland cream as the wall, like it was harmless. We didn't touch that door. We dropped our coats on the chair and stood listening, the air conditioner humming like it didn't care. Through the wall we heard music, then laughter, then the clink of glasses like somebody was celebrating. A man's voice drifted through, smooth in that practiced way that always sounded fake to me. I knew it from late nights at the office when Bram tried to impress whoever stayed, and I knew it from my own dinner table when he called me sir and acted grateful. Maris sat on the edge of the bed, hands locked together so tight her knuckles went pale, staring at the door as if staring could burn through paint. I didn't put a hand on her shoulder or offer a speech because comfort wasn't the job tonight. Clarity was all I wanted right then. I pulled out my phone, took another screenshot of the reservation, and checked that the date and both names were clean in the frame. Then I emailed it to myself and to my lawyer's intake address, the one I'd saved months earlier after a coworker's ugly divorce, because I was done trusting people to suddenly do the right thing. The minutes dragged by, slow. The music rose and fell, and every laugh on the other side landed like an insult. Maris breathed through her nose, slow and controlled, like she was trying to stay inside her own skin. I watched the digital clock on the nightstand tick forward until it read around 10:40 at night, and then the wall went quiet in that heavy way that tells you exactly what's happening without showing you. I picked up the hotel phone and dialed their room. My hand didn't shake, and that surprised me, because part of me had expected rage to make me sloppy. The line clicked, and Lennox answered on the second ring with a warm voice that sounded relaxed, proud. "Hello, who is this?" she said like she was greeting room service. "Hey Lennox, it's me," I said. "I'm in the room right next door." I let the silence stretch until it felt sharp, the way you hold a blade without moving. Then I added, "And I'm not here alone. Bram's wife is with me and we figured we'd all catch up." Maris didn't speak, but her jaw clenched so hard I heard her teeth grind. On the other side of the wall, there was scrambling, a muffled hiss of panic, and then arguing that turned into tight, breathless panic. Later, Maris showed me the screenshots that followed, Bram typing things like, "You said he wouldn't find out," and Lennox firing back, "Fix it right now," like the problem was my timing instead of their choices. I stood, walked to their door, and knocked hard enough that my knuckles stung. After a few frantic seconds, the door cracked open and Bram filled the gap in a robe, sweating like he'd run a mile, eyes darting past me for an exit. Lennox stood behind him with her hair messed up and her face blank, and I stepped forward into the doorway. He tried to speak like he had a script ready, but nothing came out clean. Lennox stayed behind him with her arms crossed, face blank like she was watching numbers move on a screen. "Step aside, Bram," I said, steady and flat, because I wasn't giving him the dignity of anger. "You don't get to play polite right now, and you sure don't get to hide behind my wife." He shifted like he wanted to argue, then his eyes flicked past me and landed on Maris in the hallway, and his whole posture changed. Lennox finally spoke, not apologizing, not shocked, just annoyed. "Thayer, do not do this here," she said, like the problem was the carpet and the lighting. I didn't debate her, because that's what she wanted. I didn't need a confession in a hotel doorway, and I wasn't there to beg for one. "You already did it," I said, and I turned away from them like they were strangers who'd wandered into my life by mistake. Maris walked beside me back to our room without touching me, and that was fine, because this wasn't comfort time. This was inventory time, and I had just seen enough to know I wasn't crazy. Before sunrise, I left with a duffel bag and my laptop like I was checking out of a place I didn't want my name attached to anymore. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound too loud, and the front desk guy didn't ask questions. I dropped my keycards, kept my face straight, and walked out into cold morning air that smelled like wet pavement. By noon, Lennox had sent 3 texts, each one a different costume. The first one was angry, accusing me of humiliating her and crossing a line, like I'd broken a rule she invented. The second one turned sweet, talking about how we'd built a life and how I shouldn't blow everything up. The third one went practical, like a work email, and the closest thing to remorse she offered was, "We need to talk like adults," which made my stomach twist because adults don't charge affairs to a corporate card. I called my parents expecting something basic, like concern, maybe even embarrassment on my behalf. My father, Lyle Locke, answered in his clipped business voice, the same one he used with donors and city boards. "Did you make a scene at that hotel?" he asked, and that was his first question, not how I was doing, and not what happened. I stared at my phone like it had insulted me. "That's what you care about?" I said. "Not what she did, not the company card, just whether I embarrassed you." My mother, Sila, jumped in fast, her tone soft but sharp underneath. "Lennox has been under pressure, Thayer, and you shouldn't throw away a marriage over a night," she said, like my marriage was a glass she didn't want spilled on the carpet. I told her, it wasn't a night, it was a decision, and she signed my family's name to it. Greer got on the call like she'd been waiting for her turn, and she said, "You're being emotional and dramatic," while her voice climbed higher with every word. I stayed calm, which somehow made her angrier. Then Greer said the quiet part out loud, and I finally understood the real panic. "The Mercer Civic Tower bid is coming up," she snapped, "and Lac Atelier cannot afford distractions right now." There it was, clean and ugly, my life reduced to a distraction, my marriage treated like a scheduling issue. I went silent for a beat, not because I was hurt, but because something clicked into place. Lennox didn't create the disrespect in my life. She just made it impossible to pretend it wasn't already baked in. I ended the call without a goodbye and opened my laptop on the nearest table like it was a work day. I started a plain document and typed a header that said timeline, because I was done letting my history live as family storytelling. If they wanted to treat me like a replaceable part, fine, I would start treating every detail like evidence. Later that day, Maris texted me, "I'm not just mad. I'm worried about finances," and the message felt heavier than any insult. She told me she worked in forensic auditing, and she'd already flagged Bram for weird reimbursements that never made sense when she asked about them. Most of what she had came from the boring paper trail any spouse can see, joint account alerts, tax folders, and the reimbursement emails he never bothered to hide. Then she added, "They don't sound like people who slipped up once, Thayer. They sound like people who have a system." I saved her text, created a new folder labeled Receipts, and started uploading everything I had. I dropped everything into that Receipts folder and kept digging through my own life like it was a crime scene. I'd worked at Lac Atelier since my late 20s, and on paper, I had a clean title, Senior Concept Lead. In real life, I was the quiet brain that made my family's pitches actually land, the guy in the background who made sure the story sounded smart. My designs won competitions, and then Greer took the stage for the photos while Lyle shook hands like he'd personally drawn every line. I could still see it clear as day, those conference rooms with the glossy boards and the catered trays. Greer would stand there in a sharp blazer and say, "Our vision," and my father would smile like a proud king, and I'd be off to the side holding the backup USB like some employee who happened to share their last name. People would thank me in that vague way, like they couldn't remember why I was in the room but assumed I belonged there. I used to tell myself it was fine because I didn't like the spotlight, but that was a lie I used to stay useful. The worst part was my grad school dissertation on regenerative urban design because it became the backbone for half our green brand. I knew it wasn't in my head because I watched my own diagrams get reused with my name scrubbed off, the same arrows, the same flowcharts, the same language softened just enough to pretend it was new. I'd see it in internal decks and public brochures, and I'd feel that old sting, then swallow it because swallowing things was what I did. In my temporary rental, I tore through old boxes like I was looking for a missing weapon. Dust got on my hands, and the cardboard scraped my knuckles, and I didn't stop until I found the printed copy of that dissertation. Professor Halston Avery's notes were still in the margins in tight handwriting, little pushes and corrections that proved the work had a real history. My name sat on the cover in plain ink, no branding, no family gloss, just mine. I set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it was the first honest thing I'd touched in years. A few days later, the Mercer Civic Tower brief dropped publicly, and my stomach went cold reading it. It wasn't word-for-word theft, it was worse, like someone had lifted the spirit of my research without knowing where it came from, and now they were chasing it for a major bid. Inside the firm systems, the usual pattern lit up right away. Calendar blocks labeled Greer, Mercer Vision Session, and internal emails asking for old sanctuary concepts to be refreshed. That word refreshed always meant, make it look different enough to claim it. And I could almost hear my sister's voice practicing lines. Then I found moves I didn't expect, the kind that told me Lennox wasn't just cheating, she was managing damage. In the firm's website queue, there was a draft press release Lennox had written, ready but not published, announcing I'd be taking a personal leave due to stress, like I was some fragile problem they needed to hide. Right after that, in an HR folder I still had access to, there was a complaint form started in my name, unfinished but clearly framed to paint me as difficult to work with and hostile. Bram didn't have the brains for that kind of setup, and Greer didn't have the patience. That was Lennox, using her PR skills like a knife. Maris met me again at a small cafe near her office, the kind of place with scratched tables and strong coffee that didn't pretend to be luxury. She slid a laptop toward me and said, "I didn't hack anything or do anything illegal, but I pulled what I already had access to." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were hard, the way mine had started to get. I asked, "Is it as bad as it feels?" And she said, "It's worse because it's patterned." She showed me a spreadsheet built from bank alerts, emailed expense reports, and reimbursement statements, clean columns and dates lined up like soldiers. There were hotel charges, client dinners, weekend site visits, all in the same range, all with the same excuses attached, all spaced out like someone thought that made it invisible. Maris tapped the screen and said, "This isn't one stupid night, Thayer. This is routine." And I exported the file straight into my receipts folder and hit save. I shut the laptop, but my brain didn't shut off. The spreadsheet Maris gave me sat in my folder like a loaded tool, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel confused about what to do next. I felt focused, which is a colder feeling than anger, but a lot more useful. I hired a divorce attorney the next morning, not some loud billboard shark with a cheap grin. She was calm, mid-40s maybe, with a neat office and the kind of eyes that didn't blink at other people's mess. She listened while I laid out the facts, and when I paused, she said, "We move on facts, not feelings, Mr. Locke, because feelings don't hold up." I nodded because that was the first sentence anyone had said to me that week that actually sounded like a plan. The filing started that same week, and the court calendar moved like it was dragging a chain. My attorney explained it straight, saying the divorce itself would crawl for months, which meant I had time to do this clean instead of loud. Lennox wanted me emotional and sloppy because that's easy to label and dismiss. I wasn't giving her that anymore, and I told my lawyer, I want everything documented like I'm building a case file, not telling a sad story. Once divorce became a process instead of a wound, I went after the other problem I'd been swallowing for years. I booked a consult with an intellectual property lawyer, a guy who talked in simple terms and didn't act impressed by the Locke name. I brought my dissertation, a few old project drafts, and a thumb drive of internal decks I still had access to. He flipped through pages, then looked up and said, "Authorship is about dates, drafts, and process. If you have that, you have leverage." I didn't ask him for revenge, and I didn't ask him to teach my family a lesson. I said, "I want my work to stop disappearing." That afternoon, I reached out to Professor Halston Avery for the first time in years. My hands hesitated over the keyboard for half a second, then I typed anyway, because pride didn't pay bills, and it sure didn't protect me. He called me back faster than I expected, and his voice was steady, like we were discussing a project instead of a betrayal. "I don't need the gossip there," he said. "I need timestamps, drafts, and proof of process." That was it, no sympathy performance, just the language of truth. Avery still had my old submissions and feedback emails archived, which honestly floored me. He also had a letter he'd written recommending my work for an award, dated and signed, the kind of thing nobody could hand-wave away as family collaboration. When he forwarded those files, my inbox filled up with the past in neat digital form, and it felt like watching someone hand me back my own name. I saved everything twice, then printed the most important pieces because paper has weight, and weight matters when people try to rewrite you. Through Avery, I got a clean introduction to Stellan Mercer's office. It wasn't a favor, and it wasn't a bribe, just a narrow opening in a door that had stayed closed because my family stood in it. His assistant, Jory Vale, called me, brisk and polite, and said, "I can give you 5 minutes on the day of the pitch, and that is all." I told her, 5 minutes is enough if people are listening, and I meant it. I didn't warn my family about any of this, and I didn't send accusations in writing that they could twist into drama. I let them keep believing I was drowning in the divorce, because that's how they liked me, quiet, cornered, and easy to manage. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my concept privately, the same core idea, but improved and clearly mine, so if anyone compared files, mine showed evolution instead of copying. I worked at my rental's small kitchen table late into the night, coffee going cold beside my laptop, and I saved every version with dates like I was stacking bricks. Maris helped like a professional, not like a friend trying to soothe me. We met in public again, and she slid a thick binder across the table with tabs and labels like hotels, corporate card, and late nights. She said, "It's clean, boring, and devastating, which is exactly what holds up," and I didn't argue. We also agreed on one hard rule, said out loud like a contract: no punishing through gossip. No social media hints, no public screaming, no mutual friends turned into messengers. "If we stay tight," Maris said, "they can't call us unstable," and I answered, "Good, because I'm done handing them excuses." The plan wasn't to embarrass them for fun, and it wasn't to win some petty victory. The plan was to let Lennox and Bram and my family walk into a room full of decision-makers and explain my work without understanding it, then let the evidence do the talking in plain English. I opened my laptop, created a folder labeled Pitch Day, and dragged Avery's emails, my drafts, and Maris's timeline into it one file at a time. Pitch Day hit with that sterile kind of pressure where everything looked expensive and nobody admitted they were nervous. The Mercer Civic Tower meeting sat inside a glass-heavy conference space that felt designed to make people whisper, even when they had power. Voices stayed low, watches flashed when hands moved, and every smile looked practiced. Locke Atelier's team took seats like they owned the room, which wasn't new. My father sat near the front, shoulders back, suit perfect, looking like he was already accepting congratulations. Greer sat beside him with a tablet and a water glass placed just right, like she'd rehearsed even the way she reached for it. I stayed in the back until my slot opened, because that was how it always worked. They didn't notice me at first, and honestly, that was normal enough. It almost made me laugh. I'd built half their legacy from the shadows, and they still treated my presence like a typo. Greer started the pitch like she invented the future. She clicked through slides with smooth confidence and hit all the familiar beats. Rain capture, passive cooling, public sanctuary levels, community flow, all my language dressed up in her voice. "We're offering a civic landmark that performs like a living system," she said, and people nodded because it sounded smart. From the back, I watched her eyes flick to notes she didn't need to understand, only to recite. She talked about the core system and then called it a cost-saving feature, like it was a coupon instead of the entire moral spine of the design. That was the moment it sealed for me, because anyone who understood it would never reduce it to saving money. My father leaned in and added a line when she paused, smiling like a proud king watching his heir. "Our team has been developing this philosophy for years," he said, calm and certain, and he didn't even glance toward the back of the room. Greer nodded and moved on, still polished, still wrong in the places that mattered. Jory Vale, Stellan Mercer's assistant, sat near the side with a slim folder in front of her. When the schedule hit my slot, she gave me a small nod that felt like a door unlocking. I stood up, and the first heads turning toward me carried that quick annoyance people get when something unexpected interrupts the plan. I walked to the front without rushing and without apologizing. "My name is Thayer Locke," I said, keeping my voice level because I wasn't there to beg for attention. "I believe this design philosophy deserves to be explained by its actual author, and I'm asking for 5 minutes to do that." Greer's face tightened for half a second, then went neutral again like she was putting on makeup. My father's eyes sharpened, but he stayed still, probably hoping the room would treat me like background noise. I plugged in my laptop and brought up my deck, less flashy and more grounded, because real work doesn't need confetti. I moved through the concept in plain language and kept it tight. Then I pulled up the receipts one by one, like placing files on a table where nobody could pretend they didn't see them. The dissertation cover showed my name in plain ink. The professor emails had dates and feedback threads. The drafts showed progression, and Avery's recommendation letter sat there like a stamp that didn't care about family politics. I didn't call anyone a thief out loud because I didn't have to. I put my evidence next to their claims and let the room do basic math without me narrating it. The silence got heavy fast, and I could hear someone's pen stop moving like their hand had frozen. Then I added the proof that turned it from private betrayal into professional risk, because money always gets attention when morals don't. I showed the hotel reservation line, the corporate card use, and the pattern of client development expenses tied to nights Lennox and Bram were supposedly working late. Stellan Mercer didn't raise his voice or act dramatic. He leaned back, looked at my father and sister, and asked, "Do you want to revise your statement on authorship before legal gets involved?" The room stayed quiet after Stellan Mercer asked that question, and my father's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. Greer's hand hovered near her tablet like she could swipe reality away. Jory didn't look at me, but she did look at my files, like she'd already decided what mattered. As soon as we got into the hallway, my father grabbed my elbow hard enough to make a point without leaving a mark. He leaned in close, voice low and furious, and said, "You set the family on fire for an ego trip." He didn't say I was wrong, and he didn't even try to deny the proof. He acted like the crime was that I'd made the brand look dirty instead of protecting it. I pulled my arm free and said, "If the truth hurts the brand, then the brand was built on a lie." Greer came at me next, fast and sharp, like she'd been saving up her lines. "You're jealous of my success, and you always have been," she said, loud enough for a couple people to glance over. I kept my voice even because I wasn't giving her a scene to use against me. "You can't be jealous of something you didn't build," I said, and the way her mouth tightened told me it landed. She started to talk again, but my lawyer's voice echoed in my head. Facts, not feelings. So I turned and walked away instead of trading insults. Lennox showed up later like it was a negotiation meeting, not the collapse of our marriage. She caught me near the exit, hair perfect again, face composed like she'd had time to practice. "Thayer, tell me what it would take for you to keep this quiet," she said, and she said it like she was asking about a contract clause. I looked at her and realized she wasn't scared that she'd hurt me. She was scared that she'd lose control. "You don't get to buy silence with my own last name," I said. "Talk to my attorney because I'm done taking meetings with you." She blinked once, then nodded like she was making notes. Within a week, she tried to control the narrative the only way she knew how, by turning me into a problem people could dismiss. Staff heard I was unstable, mutual friends heard I was paranoid, and a couple people hinted I'd misunderstood the hotel situation, like I'd accidentally booked my wife a romantic suite with another man. One junior project manager called me and said, careful and nervous, "Lennox said you're having a rough time and we should give you space." I answered, "Space is fine, but lies are not," and I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. Maris backed me up with what I didn't witness firsthand, and she did it without emotion, which made it hit harder. She forwarded screenshots of Bram begging her not to blow up his career, writing things like he'd made a mistake and he could fix it. Then she sent a screenshot of a shared calendar entry labeled Avelian Reset, like cheating was maintenance and wives were appliances. I saved every file and dropped them into the same folder because the only way to beat a smear campaign was to keep stacking proof until the lie collapsed under its own weight. Bram got suspended pending internal review, and nobody pretended it was about morals. It was about corporate card misuse and false expense coding, the kind of thing that makes executives sweat in a way adultery never does. People could ignore betrayal, but they couldn't ignore fraud-adjacent behavior tied to receipts. Maris told me his boss called it risk exposure, and I almost laughed at how clean that language was for such dirty choices. Stellan Mercer's team asked for my documentation formally, not as gossip, but as part of their process. My lawyer loved that, because it turned my proof into something official instead of a personal rant. I sent the packet through my attorney, neat and boring, and I watched L'Atelier lose the tower bid in real time, clean and immediate. After that, clients started asking questions, not loudly at first, but enough that the office air changed. 2 junior designers emailed me quietly, one after the other, saying, "I saw what you did in there," and then, "If you ever start your own shop, are you hiring?" My family tried to buy the problem away the next day with a settlement offer that came with a non-disclosure agreement and a payout, as long as I returned and let Greer keep the spotlight. I read it once, felt nothing, and slid it back across the table unsigned. Lennox's divorce stance changed overnight once the corporate card issue became real, and suddenly she wanted an amicable split, which was funny in the worst way. I picked up my phone, called my attorney, and told her to file the next motion. Then I hung up and stared at the quiet wall of my rental like it was daring me to go back to being small. I didn't get any big cinematic moment after that, no crowd clapping, no perfect one-liner that fixed my life. What I got was something colder and better. Doors started opening because people finally saw my name tied to my work, and they couldn't unsee it. The first door was a plain lease in a tired office building that smelled like fresh paint and old carpet. I signed it anyway and launched Lock Regenerative Studio out of a small space with 2 desks and a clean sign on the glass. No family photos, no legacy talk, no third-generation vision nonsense, just my actual work and a calendar that belonged to me. When someone walked in, they didn't see my father's handshake history. They saw my drafts and my process. Stellan Mercer didn't hand me the whole project like it was a prize, and I didn't want charity anyway. He brought me in as lead concept architect with a contract that spelled out authorship in plain language, like he'd learned the hard way that vague terms get people sued. His legal team kept it tight and simple, and when I asked Jory Vale if this was going to turn into a political mess, she said, "We prefer clean paper over clean feelings, Mr. Locke." I told her, "That is exactly what I'm offering," and I signed. L'Atelier tried to sue me for company property like they could own the inside of my brain. My attorney didn't panic or posture. She answered with a timeline that showed my dissertation predating their so-called internal concept library by years. She laid out dates, drafts, and proof of process like she was building a fence, and she told me, "They can yell, but they can't outdate you." The lawsuit noise didn't disappear, but it stopped sounding scary once facts pinned it down. Maris stayed practical the whole time, and I respected that more than any comforting speech. She used the same calm documentation style to untangle joint accounts and protect herself from Bram's financial mess. Because it wasn't just cheating, it was money patterns that left bruises you couldn't see. When she called, she didn't cry into the phone. She said things like, "I found 3 reimbursements that don't match any client," and "His expense coding doesn't line up with his calendar." I'd answer, "Save it, label it, and send it through counsel," because that was the only language that kept us safe. Through discovery, we heard things we hadn't witnessed firsthand, and those were the parts that made me laugh without humor. Emails surfaced where Lennox pitched Greer on pushing me out, calling me dead weight, and saying the firm needed one vision and one face. Seeing my wife write that about me didn't hurt the way it used to. It clarified everything. It wasn't just betrayal in a hotel, it was a plan to erase me with polite words. Bram and Lennox weren't some tragic romance, and they didn't even pretend to be once consequences showed up. They were two people chasing status, and when the ground got hot, they turned on each other fast. Maris learned that through mediation notes and lawyer calls, and she told me one afternoon, he's blaming her for everything now, like she was reporting the weather. I said, of course he is, because accountability was never his thing, and we both stayed focused on paperwork instead of satisfaction. L'Atelier's donors started backing away once the story stopped being family drama and became stolen authorship tied to documented misuse. Reputation is everything until it costs money, and then people suddenly remember their morals. I heard about canceled lunches, postponed meetings, and a few donors who wanted their names distanced from the noise. My father tried to act like it was temporary, but once lawyers start reading receipts out loud, there's no folding that noise back into silence. Greer tried launching a solo boutique brand with my father's money behind it, a shiny little thing with sleek graphics and big promises. It lasted 6 months before clients realized the pitch was polished, but the substance was thin, and the referrals dried up when the work didn't hold up under questions. I didn't celebrate it, but I noticed the quiet in my inbox when her name stopped being treated like a guarantee. Late one afternoon, Maris and I sat with coffee and no romance in it, just mutual respect and the shared exhaustion of cleaning up other people's damage. She stared into her cup and said, I spent years being the support person in his plan, and I didn't even realize it until it got ugly. I nodded and answered, I did the same thing with my family, and they trained me to call it loyalty. We finished our coffee, walked out into the street, and I went straight back to my office and peeled the backing off the new studio sign before pressing it onto the glass. That sign stayed on my studio glass, clean and simple. I stopped flinching every time I saw my own last name printed like it belonged to me. About a year after the Avalian night, I stood near the Mercer Civic Tower site wearing a hard hat with Thayer Lock printed across the front, and I had to blink at it like it might vanish. The air smelled like diesel and wet dirt, and the ground was a mess of mud and plywood sheets. A foreman walked past yelling measurements, and nobody cared who my father was. They cared if my callouts matched the drawings and if the plan held up under pressure. I was not going to pretend I felt joy, because joy would have been too clean for what it cost. What I felt was steadier, like a weight finally set down instead of carried. I watched a concrete truck back in, listened to radios crackle, and felt relief that I was not invisible anymore, plus pride that my proof was under my feet. When the foreman asked, Thayer, do you want the runoff channel shifted or left as drawn? I answered, shift it 2 feet and keep the slope consistent, and he nodded and moved. I did not see Lennox much after the divorce, but I heard enough through normal channels to understand how fast shine fades. The board at L'Atelier panicked, and she lost her PR role. Then she never landed another spot with the same gloss. Bram tried to blame Lennox, then tried to blame stress, then tried to blame everyone but himself, and Maris told me that through lawyer updates, not gossip. The pattern did not change, just the excuses, and I stopped wasting energy hoping either of them would suddenly grow a conscience. My father sent one email that said, we should talk, and it had no apology, no accountability, just an invitation back into the old system. I read it once, set the phone down, and never replied. Months later, Greer showed up at a public planning meeting and acted like nothing happened, smiling at people like she still owned the room. When someone asked a technical question about passive cooling intake, she froze with her mouth half open, and I answered it calmly from my seat. Greer did not look at me even once, and I walked out before she could corner me. Maris and I stayed in touch, not as a couple, but as two adults who learned how to stand up without turning bitter. We traded recommendations for attorneys and accountants, and that was enough. Looking back, I should have known, but I didn't, and I didn't let that happen again. The part that mattered was simple. My name on my work, my contracts clean, my studio small but real, and my life not managed by people who only valued me when I was convenient. I adjusted my hard hat, signed the site log, and stepped back into the noise. Quick gut check before you bounce. When someone you love treats you like a background prop, do you keep the peace or blow up the script? If you've got the hype button, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. Then please subscribe and hit like. It's one click and it matters a lot. And drop a comment, even good story or what you'd do.